All right, today we're tackling a big one: income distribution. We're going to break down what it is, how we even measure it, and maybe most importantly, what the trends are telling us about the economy we're all living in. You know that feeling that the economy just isn't working the same for everyone? Well, you're definitely not imagining it. And that's exactly what we're diving into today. We're going to look at the hard data behind that gut feeling, this idea of a split economy, where some people are doing great and a lot of others, well, not so much. So let's jump right in. Okay, so first things first, we got to be on the same page. What are we even talking about when we say income distribution? It sounds kind of academic, but it's actually one of the most important ways we can check the pulse of an economy. Fundamentally, it's pretty simple. Just imagine all the money a country makes in a year as one giant pie. Income distribution is just the study of who gets which slice. Easy, right? Well, not so fast, because as you're about to see, how you decide to define income in the first place, that changes everything about the size of those slices. And this is where it starts to get tricky. You'd think income is just, money in your bank account. But it turns out the choices economists and statisticians make about what to count and what not to count can give us completely different views of how we're all doing. And honestly, if you take one thing away from this section, let it be this: the story of who's rich and who's poor can look totally different depending on how you define income. Are we talking before taxes? After? Do we count things like food stamps? This isn't just a boring technicality. It's actually central to the whole debate. Okay, let's look at this in practice. Here are three major ways to slice it. First, you have market income. Think of this as your raw earnings from your job and investments before the government gets involved at all. Then there's money income. This is the official one the Census Bureau uses. It adds in cash benefits like Social Security checks. And then you have what's probably the most complete picture: disposable income. This one adds in non-cash stuff like food stamps, and this is a big one: it subtracts the taxes you pay. And just look at the difference this makes. If you only look at market income, it seems like 4% of households have literally no income. But then, switch over to disposable income, which includes government support, and boom, that number drops to just 0.5%. It works at the top end, too. The percentage of people making over $100,000 a year drops from about 20% to less than 12% once you factor in taxes. It's a really clear picture of how much government policy actually shapes people's financial lives. So it's not just about what you count as income, but how you average it. We hear about the average income all the time, right? But usually that's the mean. The median is often a much, much better way to understand what's really going on. This quote explains it perfectly. Imagine 10 houses on a street, all making about $52,000 a year. Then one of them wins the lottery. Suddenly, the mean, or average, income for the street shoots up to almost $67,000. But did life get better for the other 9 families? Nope. The median, the income of the household right in the middle, is still $52,000. It gives you a much more honest look at the typical experience. All right, so now that we've got the toolkit, we know how to define and measure income, let's actually put it to use. Let's look at the data over a couple of decades and see what the trends really tell us. So what you're looking at here is something called the 90-10 ratio. It's a pretty straightforward way to measure the gap. It basically compares what folks in the top 10% are making to what folks in the bottom 10% are making. And what do we see? Well, back in 1993, that gap was already pretty big, about 10.5 times. But fast forward 20 years, and it's stretched to over 12 times. The takeaway is simple and stark. The distance between the top and the bottom was getting wider. Here's another way to look at it, coming back to our pie analogy. In 1993, the top 20% of earners took home almost half the entire pie, about 49%. 20 years later, their share grew to over half, 51%. And while that was happening, the slice for the bottom 20%, it actually shrank. So a bigger slice for the top, a smaller one for the bottom. And this donut chart for 2013 really drives the point home. Look at that. The top quintile, that's the top 20%, grabbed 51% of all the income. Let that sink in. That means the other 80% of the country had to split the remaining 49%. I mean, to put it another way, the top fifth made more money than the other 4/5 put together. Wow. Okay, so this growing divide has led people to look for new ways to describe what's happening, especially when we talk about recovering from a recession. And a term you hear a lot now is the K-shaped recovery. It's a really vivid way to picture the kind of split we've been seeing in the numbers. So what the heck is a K-shaped recovery? It's exactly what it sounds like. After a recession, instead of everyone recovering together, like in a V-shape, the economy splits in two. One part of the population, one part of the economy, shoots right back up.
but another part flatlines, or even keeps going down. They diverge, forming the two arms of the letter K.
Let's break down who's on each of those paths. That upper arm of the K, that's typically your higher income professionals, people who own stocks, people who can work from anywhere. Their world bounces back fast. But that bottom arm, that's where you find a lot of low-income workers, small businesses, people in service jobs. They get left behind. And the scary part is, their situation can actually get worse, even when you're hearing on the news that the economy is recovering. So why? Why does this split happen? Well, it's not just one thing. It's a whole bunch of factors, all hitting at once. People with more money have savings, so they can ride out a downturn. Technology and automation really help out a certain kind of worker, but not others. When stocks and housing prices go up, who does that help most? People who already own stocks and houses. And yeah, the policy choices we make can either close that gap or push the two arms of the K even further apart. And look, this isn't just some theory for economists to argue about in a classroom. This K-shaped trend has huge, real-world impacts on all of us. So let's talk about why this is such a big deal. Okay, this is probably the most important part. A K-shaped trend means you can have headline numbers like GDP growth that look fantastic. The stock market's up, everything's great. But for the millions and millions of people on that lower arm of the K, life isn't getting better at all. It creates this giant disconnect between the economy you read about and the economy you actually live in. And the consequences down the road are pretty serious. It obviously pumps up inequality, making the wealth gap even wider. It makes it harder for people to get ahead, what we call social mobility. And it actually creates a really unbalanced, shaky economy that depends way too much on the spending habits of just the people at the very top. And if you want a number that just perfectly captures that imbalance, here it is. Nearly half, 49%, of all consumer spending comes from just the top 10% of wealthy Americans. Think about that. When the whole system is propped up by the spending of such a small group, it makes our entire economy, well, pretty fragile. So all of this leaves us with a really big question, doesn't it? The data seems to be telling a story of an economy splitting in two, where the average experience doesn't really exist anymore. It's a story of two totally different paths. And the real challenge for all of us is to look at this and ask, which path are we on?